Binance, which is the world's largest cryptocurrency exchange, and probably even against other traditional finance exchanges, it's one of the largest exchanges in the world at the moment. They decided they wanted to kind of set up in the DWTC, but there's actually another free zone, which is the Dubai Multi-Commodity Center, the DMCC, which has a crypto center. There's currently 200 crypto companies that are established there. My company, Shisha Finance, is established there as well as an operating entity. But I think a lot of the free zones have embraced and encouraged crypto companies to set up here in Dubai, and because of the tax-free kind of benefits that companies get, they were encouraged to come here, and DWTC is one of them, but the DMCC was actually in the crypto kind of market well before the DWTC. But you're seeing more and more free zones, and I think the Sharjah Research, Technology and Innovation Park, they are actually looking at setting up a blockchain sandbox with the onshore regulator, and there's many other free zones that are actually coming on to and embracing cryptocurrencies as well.
And so, what's the timeline? Do we have a timeline on the new crypto zone at the?
I think the Dubai World Trade Center, I think it's ongoing at the moment. They've opened up for crypto companies, but the DMCC, I think, is far more advanced. They have around 200 companies, and their target is 1,000 crypto companies by the end of this year. But I think at some point this year, you'll start seeing a lot more companies coming into Dubai.
Now, obviously, one of the very practical ways in which the contest between centralization and decentralization gets deployed legally is through regulations, regulatory frameworks, and ultimately the extent to which state-based governments will intervene in the managing, the regulation, the legislation of these technologies, but also these economies, which are also cultures. No? There's something in the DNA of, let's say, I mean, it's important to remember that the white paper that Satoshi Nakamoto wrote is coming out directly from the financial crisis of 2008, 7, 8, and also, very linked to the kind of anti-capitalist movement, or the anti-bank movement, maybe more specifically at the time. And so you get the birth of these certain notions of like the sovereign individual, and this idea of which I believe is again a sort of an ethos behind DeFi, that you should have agency over your wealth, over your capital, and that it shouldn't be put in the hands of these very vague multinational corporations, etc., etc. So it's curious because as crypto and blockchain technologies obviously have become more and more mainstream, and also just the amount of capital that they now possess, there is it does seem to have now appeared onto the radars of almost every government. And so we saw Biden make an announcement almost the same time, within 24 hours, that Sheikh Mohammed did. How does Dubai play that kind of high wire act between regulation and non-regulation, between appealing to a sector that, on the one hand, as I say, seems to be spiritually invested in the idea of as little regulation as possible, but at the same time, from the perspective of the Dubai government or the UAE government, they have to be seen to be executing best practices, no? So.
Sure, yeah, I think it's very, very difficult to actually kind of regulate a technology that's decentralized in nature. And you were talking about decentralized finance, and decentralized finance is simply a protocol that's governed by the people that are using the protocol or using a product or service on the protocol. But it's easier to regulate centralized entities, central banks and so on. It's more difficult to regulate decentralized kind of applications and decentralized products and services. So I think the regulators and the government have to kind of educate themselves and kind of speak to the people that are involved in these markets and find out, how they operate, how is the consumer, how is the user protected by using these protocols, and then they can make a much more informed judgment. And even the kind of the framework that came out, a few days ago, that's still very much, there's still areas where it can be developed and it can be improved on. It's not perfect, but at least it's an effort to kind of, regulate something that's extremely difficult to regulate. And I think, the USA has kind of woken up now to see that actually, who is the biggest user of blockchain technology? It's China. And China is kind of competing with the USA now. So if the USA kind of stifles innovation, especially in blockchain technology, then they'll be left behind, and it's most likely going to be China. So that's the reason why they've kind of said, okay, they've woken up to it, and they've said, okay, this technology is here to stay, so we need to regulate it and we need to govern it. But I think cryptocurrencies is an alternative to traditional currencies, because if you see most traditional currencies, the effect of inflation on them over the last 50 years has been tremendous. Like, if you look at the value of the dollar today compared to 50 years ago, it's completely really, really devalued. And you're not talking about other currencies like Zimbabwe and Colombia, where their actual currencies are pretty much completely hyperinflated. So it's an alternative for people who have really weak traditional currencies in their countries to use. So, for example, El Salvador, they've embraced Bitcoin as their actual reserve currency, rather than the dollar or the local currency. So I think over the last few hundred years, you've seen cases where, the traditional currency has been pegged to gold or an asset or a commodity, and then it's been unpegged because the central bank wants to print more money to pay for their debts, which they've accumulated over the many years, over the so many wars that have happened in the past. So I think people are now, a lot more educated than they were 50 to 100 years ago. And people can see that central banks are, abusing the trust that people have placed in them, and even governments. There's certain governments where the people don't trust them. But cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology gives you a trustless layer where you don't have to trust a central authority or a central party. You trust the code, an algorithm, and you trust that it's going to be fair to everybody that's participating in that system.
You mentioned China, Saeed, and I think obviously one can't have almost any discussion without talking about China, but particularly in this space, we've seen them, again in the last certainly 18 months, make a very kind of aggressive move towards, what could be called, blockchain with Chinese characteristics or something like this, right? And that has involved beta testing their own CBDC, central bank digital currency. I believe in summer of 2020, I think in Shanghai initially, around 200,000 dollars, something like that. To the move last May, where they then kicked out all the crypto mining, and that some 78% of the world's crypto mining took place in China. And so that was, again, it's no surprise that the Chinese authorities' attitude towards this technology would be, well, we love the technology, we don't necessarily love the decentralization part of it. There had been talk about a CBDC here. It's one of the things that even Joe Biden mentioned. Is this the way in which, again, centralized state and statecraft feel comfortable in engaging with the technology, do you think?
Yeah, sure. I think central bank digital currency is one use case of blockchain technology. It means that if a central bank has a central bank digital currency where they can actually monitor in real time the effect of monetary policy and different decisions with monetary policy, if they can see it in real time and see exactly where the money is going across all different sectors of an economy, that makes it much more easier for a central bank and a government to determine monetary policy. So I think blockchain technology makes a lot of things more efficient, and that would include central bank monetary policy. So I think, I'm not surprised that China are looking at it. I'm not surprised the US is looking at it. The UAE is looking at it. There's many countries, many central banks that are actually piloting central bank digital currency because there are benefits even for central banks to use blockchain technology. And then when you were talking about crypto mining, you know, the Chinese banning crypto mining, all the Chinese miners, the mining companies started, you know, looking elsewhere. And this is actually where I think Abu Dhabi and the UAE in ADQ has actually thought, you know what, let's actually invest in crypto mining. And they put in over $1 billion of order for mining equipment to actually start mining Bitcoin using clean energy, which is nuclear energy here in the UAE. So I think, you know, there's definitely scope for central banks, governments, private companies, large corporations to actually use cryptocurrency and use blockchain technology. And you know, there's huge multinational companies that have Bitcoin in their balance sheet as treasury because they know that traditional currencies are losing their value over time. So there's a use case for it, there's a need for it, there are benefits for it everywhere.
You mentioned the word education in one of your comments, and I wonder how you feel, because it still does feel that there is, you know, at the very least, a kind of two-tier structure within, you know, society, those who know, those who don't know. I think an event like what's happening here at Archive in the digital section and the talks and everything, hopefully is contributing, trying to bridge that gap. But, I mean, given, I don't think I'm wrong to characterize you as being extremely, not just optimistic, but